At exactly 05:47 hours, when the first pale light touched the frozen asphalt of Highway M14, Russia lost $500 million in under 90 seconds. Not to missiles screaming from the sky, not to artillery thunder rolling across the steppes, but to something far quieter and infinitely more patient. To code written in basement rooms 300 kilometers away. To algorithms that had been watching, learning, waiting for this precise moment when overconfidence would meet mathematics. The convoy stretched for 18 kilometers, 412 vehicles carrying everything Moscow needed to sustain its eastern offensive for the next 6 weeks. T-80 battle tanks worth $4 million each, Panzer air defense systems valued at $15 million per unit, ammunition trucks loaded with shells that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Behind the wheel of every vehicle sat a driver who believed morning meant safety, who trusted steel and numbers and the weight of overwhelming force. They were wrong about all three. Ukraine had been preparing for this convoy since before it existed. Not through spies or satellites, but through something far more modern and terrifying. Pattern recognition software that analyzed thousands of hours of radio chatter, logistics reports filed in triplicate, fuel consumption data from depots 500 kilometers east. Every routine became a prediction. Every habit became a vulnerability. Every assumption about how armies move became a weapon pointed directly at the heart of Russian strategy. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Russian convoys moved at an average speed of 37 kilometers per hour on Highway M14. They maintained spacing of 45 meters between vehicles. They communicated every 12 minutes using encrypted bursts that lasted exactly 43 seconds. They refueled at predetermined intervals based on fuel consumption models developed in the 1980s. Models that assumed the enemy would fight like it was still the 1980s. But this enemy had evolved beyond recognition. While Russia prepared for the last war, Ukraine had been designing the next one. A war where patience mattered more than firepower, where timing mattered more than tonnage, where the ability to wait in perfect silence until the exact right moment could erase armies without firing a single conventional shot. The attack began 3 hours before dawn with something that looked like maintenance. Across 17 locations along Highway M14, small teams dressed as road repair crews began installing what appeared to be standard reflective markers, solar-powered units that would help drivers navigate the pre-dawn darkness. Each marker contained a battery that would last exactly 6 hours. Each battery powered a device smaller than a smartphone. Each device waited for a signal that would arrive at precisely the moment when mathematics and opportunity converged. Meanwhile, 200 kilometers to the west, a different kind of preparation unfolded in an abandoned textile factory. Banks of computers hummed quietly in rooms that had once housed industrial looms. Screens glowed with telemetry data, satellite feeds, and countdown timers measuring time not in hours, but in heartbeats. Operators who had trained for this moment for 18 months sat before keyboards that could reshape the battlefield with keystrokes measured in milliseconds. The convoy commander felt confident as his formation rolled through the darkness. Senior Colonel Dmitry Volkov had moved supplies across contested territory for 12 years. He knew every road, every bridge, every potential ambush point along this route. His vehicles carried jamming equipment rated to defeat any known Ukrainian electronics. His air cover included helicopters equipped with thermal imaging that could spot infantry from 15 kilometers away. His intelligence briefings showed no enemy activity within a 100-kilometer radius. Intelligence can be wrong. Mathematics rarely is. At 05:23 hours, the first marker activated. Not with explosions or visible signs, but with a signal so brief it lasted less than half a second. A data burst that traveled through frequencies Russian jamming equipment had never been programmed to detect. 17 markers along 43 kilometers of highway suddenly became 17 invisible sentries, each one tracking the thermal signatures of approaching vehicles with precision measured in centimeters. The convoy rolled forward, engines rumbling through the morning mist, unaware that the road itself had turned against them. Each vehicle that passed a marker triggered a cascade of calculations. Speed, weight, thermal signature, position relative to other vehicles, estimated fuel load, probable armor configuration. Data flowed through fiber optic cables buried beneath the asphalt, cables that had been installed during routine road maintenance 6 months earlier. Maintenance that Moscow had approved and paid for without realizing they were funding their own destruction. Inside the textile factory, operators watched streams of data populate their screens. Vehicle identification markers appeared in perfect formation, color-coded by threat level and target priority. Green for supply trucks carrying fuel and ammunition, yellow for command vehicles equipped with communications gear, red for main battle tanks and air defense systems. Each color represented millions of dollars in equipment. Each marker represented years of training and battlefield experience about to vanish in coordinated silence. The countdown reached 0 at exactly 05:47 hours. Not because someone pressed a button, but because algorithms determined this was the mathematically optimal moment. The convoy had reached maximum density along the highway. Weather conditions provided optimal atmospheric pressure for shaped charge effectiveness. Wind speed measured at 1.2 meters per second from the southeast, perfect for debris pattern calculations. Even the angle of the rising sun had been factored into targeting solutions computed 3 weeks in advance. What happened next defied everything military strategists thought they knew about modern warfare. The attack did not come from above or from the sides or from positions Russia could identify and counter. It came from below, from the road itself, from infrastructure Moscow had trusted completely. 17 synchronized detonations erupted not as explosions, but as precisely calculated pressure waves designed to flip physics against armor that had been built to withstand conventional threats. The first tank commander realized something was wrong when his 48-ton vehicle suddenly felt weightless. For exactly 2.3 seconds, his T-80 main battle tank flew through the air like debris thrown by an invisible giant. When it landed, the impact shattered components that had been designed to survive direct hits from enemy shells. Not through overwhelming force, but through precise application of physics principles that turned weight into weakness and momentum into destruction. Across 43 kilometers of highway, mathematics rewrote the rules of combat. Fuel trucks designed to resist small arms fire found themselves facing pressures that exceeded their structural limits by factors engineers had never calculated. Command vehicles equipped with jamming gear discovered that electronics designed to defeat enemy signals could not defeat the laws of physics when those laws were applied with surgical precision. Senior Colonel Volkov watched his convoy disappear not in a single massive explosion, but in a rolling wave of coordinated destruction that moved faster than sound and left silence in its wake. The radio went silent first. Not dead, not jammed, simply absent of human voices that had been chattering coordinates and status reports just seconds before. Volkov pressed his transmission key repeatedly, calling for responses that would never come. His communications officer stared at displays that showed green lights for every frequency, perfect signal strength, optimal atmospheric conditions for radio propagation. Everything worked perfectly, except for the voices that should have been using it. Through the armored glass of his command vehicle, Volkov watched smoke columns rise from positions where his leading elements should have been advancing. Not the black rolling smoke of burning fuel, but thin gray wisps that spoke of electronics dying and hydraulic systems bleeding pressure into morning air. The smoke rose straight up in the windless dawn, marking graves that had been dug by mathematics and filled by physics. Behind him, his remaining vehicles began to slow, not from tactical caution, but from something far more primitive. Drivers who had been pushing forward with mechanical confidence suddenly found themselves staring at a highway that had betrayed fundamental assumptions about how roads behave. The asphalt ahead looked identical to the asphalt behind, but the evidence suggested otherwise. 17 craters marked points where reality had briefly suspended its normal rules. Inside the textile factory, operators watched thermal signatures fade from their displays one by one. Each disappearing marker represented successful target elimination, but the clinical language of military efficiency could not capture what they had actually witnessed. They had watched $500 million in military equipment simply stop existing in the span of time it takes to draw a breath. Machines that had required months to build and years to crew had been erased by algorithms that had been thinking about this moment for exactly 14 weeks. The aftermath calculations began immediately. Automated systems tallied destroyed vehicles, estimated personnel casualties, projected impact on Russian logistics networks extending across 3 time zones. 412 vehicles had entered the kill zone. 47 vehicles had survived, scattered across the final 8 kilometers of highway like pieces from a game that had been abandoned mid-play. The survival rate measured at 11.4%. The cost-effectiveness ratio measured at $37,000 in Ukrainian resources expended per $1 million in Russian assets destroyed. But numbers could not capture the psychological impact now radiating outward from Highway M14. Every Russian commander within 500 kilometers would soon receive reports that defied their understanding of battlefield dynamics. Roads that had been considered safe for decades would suddenly require threat assessments. Supply routes that had been mapped and certified by engineers would need to be reconsidered by specialists who understood that infrastructure itself could become weaponized. Senior Colonel Volkov climbed from his command vehicle and walked forward along the highway that had just rewritten military doctrine. His boots crunched on debris that had once been precision-engineered components, now reduced to fragments that told the story of what happens when force meets mathematics at precisely calculated angles. The morning air carried the scent of burned electronics and the metallic taste of vaporized steel. 3 kilometers ahead, where his lead elements had been advancing just minutes before, the highway looked perfectly normal. Asphalt stretched toward the horizon in smooth curves that followed terrain mapped by Soviet engineers 50 years earlier. There were no visible signs of ambush positions, no evidence of enemy presence, no indication that anything unusual had occurred, except for the absence of 412 vehicles that had been traveling this route when the sun came up. The silence felt different now. Not the comfortable quiet of early morning, but the absolute stillness that follows when sound itself has been shocked into submission. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb air that had recently contained explosions measured in microseconds and pressures calculated to 7 decimal places. Nature itself appeared to be processing what had just happened to physics in this particular corner of the world. Volkov activated his satellite communicator and began composing a report that would reach Moscow within minutes and reshape Russian tactical doctrine within hours. How do you explain to generals trained in conventional warfare that the enemy had turned mathematics into artillery? How do you brief strategists accustomed to thinking in terms of firepower and maneuver that algorithms had become more dangerous than armor-piercing shells? The Ukrainian operators began shutting down their systems with the methodical precision of craftsmen completing a project that had required months of preparation and seconds of execution. Screens went dark in sequence as servers powered down and data streams terminated. Within 30 minutes, the textile factory would appear abandoned again, showing no signs that it had recently served as the nerve center for an operation that had just redefined the boundaries between infrastructure and weaponry. But the real impact was only beginning to unfold across networks that extended far beyond a single highway in eastern Ukraine. Every Russian logistics officer would soon be questioning assumptions about supply route security that had been considered fundamental for decades. Every convoy commander would be calculating new risk factors that had not existed in any manual until this morning. Every military planner would be revising models that had suddenly become obsolete. The mathematics that had destroyed $500 million in equipment would now begin destroying something far more valuable: confidence in systems that had been trusted completely. By 8:06:30 hours, the sun had climbed high enough to illuminate the full scope of what mathematics could accomplish when applied with surgical precision. Highway M14 stretched empty and quiet, marked only by debris that told the story of how algorithms had rewritten the rules of warfare in 90 seconds. Senior Colonel Volkov's report would reach Moscow before noon, carrying words that no Russian officer had ever been required to write. Infrastructure itself had become the enemy. This was not victory through overwhelming force or superior numbers. This was victory through patience, precision, and the quiet understanding that modern warfare belongs not to those with the heaviest armor, but to those who can turn the enemy's confidence against itself. While Russia had prepared for battles that looked like the past, Ukraine had been designing battles that looked like the future. A future where code matters more than steel, where timing matters more than firepower, where the ability to think 17 steps ahead can erase armies that never saw the attack coming. The highway would be repaired within weeks. The convoy would be replaced within months. But the lesson carved into asphalt and memory that morning would reshape military thinking for decades. Because when routine becomes predictable, predictable becomes vulnerable. And when vulnerable meets mathematics at precisely the right moment, $500 million can vanish faster than the time it takes to realize the road beneath your wheels has been waiting to destroy you.